5 minutes or so, I just want to tell you a couple of quick things. If you brought your computer and you want to follow the Trump dog, the Wi-Fi is here, the password, okay? It's Maestro 108-108-10, all right? Just to also say that if you have to use the bathrooms today, there's one right here in this room, and then there's one right outside of the kitchen. The one by the front door is off limits today, so yeah, so there's 2 bathrooms for use. There's coffee and tea and cookies in the kitchen for you to get started. If you're a fellow, and you signed up to be a fellow, there's seats for you up front. And in a few minutes, I'm going to let those seats go so other people can use them. Is there anyone here who signed up for the fellowship? No?
Does everyone know what it is? I'm a happy rear-end fellow.
Well, so the fellowship is for citizens who signed up for the entire series. So this is a privilege of a fellow, and there's seats available. So if you want to come up front, you can. And you can come on up.
You have to be a billionaire too.
Yeah. Oh, there's also some seats up top. Those might just be the best seats in the house.
There's folding chairs in the back, and some other chairs.
The box seats.
Also, if it looks like everybody's comfortable, but as people come in, if it looks like somebody needs a seat for reason they have a hurt hip or whatever, if you don't mind giving them your cozy seat and swap you around to an elder or thank you. So we'll start in a few minutes. Oh, and those who are following on the computer, we're going to start on the last page of the document, the appointments with Scott Pruitt. If you want to pull that up, that's on page, I'll tell you, there's a, well, it starts on page 71. You want to pull it up? So if you go to kingstoncitizens.org, on the main page in the welcome section, there's a link that says Trump Initiative document. Okay. So right on the front page, you just click on it, it'll bring you right up to the Google Doc. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. You know, I also know today that this event coincides with the memorial service for Pauline Oliveras, which I'm sad about, but I know some of you have to go, so feel free to go whenever you need to. Come sit. Oh, there's some seats right up here. Okay, great. All right, we're going to get started. Okay.
2 more upstairs.
Okay, so thank you for coming out and welcome. This is, yes.
Is that one seat left
Available?
Is that the seat taken? That one?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
I'll let you, don't be sorry. Nothing to be sorry about. Come on down. You're welcome. So did everybody get a program from the front? Oh, you didn't? Okay. I'm going to bring them in, we'll pass them around. Oh, I didn't. We'll get them. Julie's going to just throw them around. You're here today, to participate in KingstonCitizens.org's Community Educational Forum. This is part 2. We have an ongoing series of 8 forums. On the flip side, here they come, you can just pass them around. On the flip side of the program is the remainder events for the year, so you can see what we're doing. Just so you're aware, we're filming this event, so I hope that's okay for everyone. We're not streaming anymore, it's more efficient to film the event to the public and as a document.
Yes, that's it.
So we welcome our fellows. I explained it a little bit up front, but we offered some great ideas from citizens to offer a fellowship to allow people to sign up for the entire series. And in return, they get good seats and perhaps a newspaper subscription for the year. Just ways to keep you involved and engaged. So we thank the fellows for their participation and everyone for coming today. If you've just arrived, there at the bathrooms, I'll just repeat, there's a bathroom here in this room. There's one right outside of the kitchen, and the one by the front door is off limits today. So there's coffee, tea, snacks in the kitchen for you, and if you brought something, thank you. Yeah, keep bringing things. We appreciate that to share. So let me start by thanking the amazing volunteers that helped to make this possible. First is Julie and Peter for the use of this space for the year, the generous use of this great space, so thank you. And to their son Matthew, who he's filming today, helps us each month, so thank you, Matthew. To the KingstonCitizens.org Executive Committee and my advisors, we have Deborah Bresnan today who's taking notes on the Trump law. Heather Schwegler, who's here today, Jennifer Schwartz-Berkey, and Hillary Hoffman, who are my colleagues, so just raise your hands so you can see. Thank you to the elected officials who are here today. I see Rennie Scott Childress, who is the alderman of Ward 3 in Kingston, and Jennifer Schwartz-Berkey, who's our District 7 legislator for Ulster County. Thank you. If I didn't recognize you, I'm sorry. I should have a list outside if you're here and you're an elected official. Thank you. Okay. Also, we have a sign up if you're not on the list up front and a donation bin. Everything we do is volunteer, no one's paid. So we're starting to collect donations to help us fund websites and video and all of that. So any amount you can donate is wonderful. We're not a 501c3, so it's just a gift and we use it wisely, so thank you. So over the course of this year, citizens can expect an array of subjects with panelists and a question and answer period, as you know, as part of helping to use this interactive document, this Google Doc, which began last November and in some ways ends up becoming less and less important in the sense that things are changing so fast, that the initiatives are morphing and changing, but it's still something we're working with and trying to amend it and to make it as useful of a document as we can for the local area of New York State. But more importantly, I think it's helping us as an exercise to think about these enormous initiatives and to think about them within the New York State context to help us have the local context. So we've been working on that, and last month we did a panel on constitutional law, and this month we've been very fortunate to have Kate Hudson here with us today. So Kate is someone who came to Citizens Rescue, so to speak, during the Niagara bottling proposal. At that time, Kate was with Waterkeeper, and helped us to understand so many things. First was seeker law, which I'm sure we'll talk about today a little bit, in understanding how to work within the New York State context to fight, which is a term we tried not to use, but to fight this proposal for all of the reasons, the environmental reasons that we were concerned by. Kate also worked with the Woodstock Land Conservancy to create a study that was a pivotal moment for the project, and in the end helped us to reform the law, the charter for Kingston, to include the public with any of the water sales outside of the community. And I think a lot of you followed along, so I'm recounting. But that's how I came to know Kate, who is a mentor to me and to many of us in the community doing this work. Who has since moved to Colorado, so she's only visiting Hudson Valley for the week and is giving us one of her days to talk to us today about climate change, energy, and infrastructure. And so I wanted to begin first to say that, Kate, I want you to speak about your experience rather than read your resume, because it's so extensive. So could you give us a little background yourself on how you come to the work in New York State, and where you began and where you are today with your work?
Well, I began not as a lawyer, but a hiker. I was an inveterate outdoors person. I have my father to thank for that. And when I went to law school in the 1970s, I thought I was going to be a criminal lawyer because I was going to represent Abby Hoffman and all those other people that were trying to change the world, who were getting arrested or hiding out in the lakes.
One moment, can everybody hear? Okay.
Is it possible?
She's standing up.
You okay standing up?
And actually that, then
Here,
I'll
come
put
back
that right in my eyes. So when I got out of law school, there was a different world. And being a criminal lawyer was representing people who were charged with crimes in the criminal justice system, which has its own significant issues and problems. But I felt a little bit less connected with what I was doing. I moved up to the Hudson Valley from New York City, and I decided to switch fields of law that I was practicing in. And when I went to law school, there were no environmental law courses. And this is actually a good touchstone for this talk. So I didn't take any environmental law courses because there were no environmental law decisions to study. And when I decided to move into that field, I went to the State Department of Environmental Conservation office in New Paltz, went to the regional attorney, who I had met through the Mid-Hudson Women's Bar Association, and said, I would like to volunteer my time. Well, she practically fell off her chair, but I said, I don't know environmental law, so I'm not going to charge you for my time, and for my time to try and understand what it's all about. So for a year, I worked for DEC for nothing. And then I began to take up enough cases and responsibilities that I was hired, and I worked in the DEC office in Region 3 New Paltz from 87 to 99. Then I moved to the New York State Attorney General's Office, Environmental Protection Bureau, under Elliot Spitzer, and specifically worked on the natural resource damages claim against GE for their PCB pollution of the Hudson River. I did that work from 99 to 2007, and then I went back to DEC in Albany to start a natural resource damages unit within DEC, since they are the trustee for natural resource damages. They're supposed to be actually getting money, not just for cleanup, but to compensate the public for the damage or loss of those resources caused by pollution, and that wasn't happening. I moved to work for Riverkeeper, my first job with a not-for-profit as an environmental advocacy organization as opposed to government, in 2011, and immediately got thrown into the fight to ban a fracking ban in New York, which was a very steep learning curve. I worked very hard with a lot of really great people, grassroots all the way through to the big greens and everybody in between, and as everybody knows, this was an incredible success, an incredible victory. Just something to bring us back to SEEKR, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and it is a law that requires government officials at every level of government in DC, in New York, from local all the way up through the state, to consider the potential environmental impacts associated with decisions that they are considering making. And this was passed in the 1970s. It is an incredibly important tool. It was the reason, or part of the reason anyway, that we defeated Niagara Bottom. It is also the basis for the ban on fracking in New York, and I think a lot of people are not entirely clear on that. They think that the governor just sort of acted as emperor and said, I'm banning fracking. In fact, this was the result of a multi-year environmental impact study statement done under SEEKR, which concluded at the end of the day that the potential environmental impacts associated with allowing fracking in New York could not be avoided, and therefore, or mitigated, and therefore should not be allowed. So SEEKR is the basis for our fracking ban.
Just one question on that. How many states have the equivalent to SEEKR in the nation?
I actually don't know the number, but one of the more interesting points, so there is a federal equivalent, NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And for instance, you run into NEPA when we're talking about gas pipelines, because FERC reviews, our environmental reviews are covered by NEPA. With respect to Pilgrim Pipeline, which is proposed to go through New York and into New Jersey, New York has SEEKR. And so New York is requiring the proponents of that pipeline to fund a study of the potential environmental impacts. New Jersey does not have a NEPA equivalent state law, and the towns that are going to be impacted have had to raise money to pay for a private consultant to do the environmental impact review that is required by state law in New York. And so I don't know the answer to how many states have it and how many states don't, but
We ran into that in Connecticut. They don't have the equivalent either.
yeah. So it's an incredibly important tool when it exists. Certainly California has it as well. And we will talk more about how, as we see environmental protections being dismantled at the federal level, how much more important what is going on at the state level, and in particular states, is going to be to sort of hold the line and be a beacon for the future.
So now you're living in Colorado and you're working for Waterkeeper.
Now I'm working for Waterkeeper Alliance, and just to sort of round out Riverkeeper, shortly after, or maybe overlapped with the ban on fracking, we Riverkeeper became aware of a huge amount of crude oil coming down the Hudson River Valley on barges, on trains. Basically went from zero to a significant quantity starting around 2011. And we started to fight against that. We started to fight against the transloading facilities that were taking the oil off the trains in Albany and putting it on the barges, and also fight for train safety, et cetera, after Lackland County. And then became pulled into the Pilgrim Pipeline battle. So those were all things that...
And the anchorages.
And the anchorages, which is just an adjunct to the barges coming up the river, coming down the river with all the oil.
And that's overseen by NEPA. That's not secret at all, the anchorage.
Well, no, it's not. What is at issue is a Coast Guard decision. And since it's a federal agency making the decision, it's what government agency is making the decision determines what law governs the environmental review. So there may be, in fact, state decisions that have to be made as well. Perhaps coastal consistency, New York State Department of State. That review would be governed by seeker, and then they have to coordinate. Just to sort of wrap things around, so I left Waterkeeper in November, moved to Colorado, and began working for Waterkeeper Alliance, which is an umbrella organization that supports over 150 keepers in this country, local waterkeepers in this country, and over 300 around the world. And my new title, somewhat dauntingly, is Western U.S. Advocacy Coordinator. So all of a sudden, you know, my whole environmental experience is in the East, in New York. And all of a sudden, I have to learn a whole new body of law, Western water law. But in many ways, the work that I'm going to be focused on is very, very connected with what I've been doing here. Because much of the oil and gas that is traveling through our communities, pipeline infrastructure is being built for, is coming from public lands in the West. Our lands, taxpayer lands, and they're being leased to oil and gas companies at very small rate, very small amount of money, and they are extracting huge amounts of oil and gas, and will be extracting more, or at least this administration would like them to be extracting more and want to create an environment that will encourage extraction, which will mean more of it coming our way. I mean, I think one of the statistics that was most heart-stopping when I started working on oil transport issues through New York is that by 2013, 25% of the crude oil coming out of North Dakota was coming through Albany. Albany had never been a crude oil anything prior to that. So that just shows you how quickly things are moving. And I don't know whether I should move into.
Well, yeah, we will, but I just want to, I mean, it's ironic that at probably one of the most important times for you to be now in the Midwest is now, right? Because Colorado could use the help, and as much as we hate to see you there having to leave the Hudson Valley, it's good timing for you to be bringing everything. I remember hearing from a friend once when fracking was banned in New York State, who lives in Colorado, that they were so grateful that fracking actually came to New York so that we could fight it and set a standard for those living. It's not funny actually, but that was a comment. So I'm glad that you're out there working on behalf of all of us in a place that could really use.
And just to demonstrate how lucky we are to live in this state, there are towns in Colorado that pass local ordinances banning hydrofracking either within their town borders or within a certain number of feet of schools and hospitals. And their own state government joined the industry lawsuit to overturn those local ordinances. So we should count on people who live in New York to count themselves lucky.
Right. So okay, so let's, we had written a lot of questions based on Trump's initiatives, and Kate and I looked them over, and Kate, we reorganized them some, and so let's look at what's happened since the inauguration to give us a clear picture of where we are, where we're headed. Starting with Scott Pruitt, now is the head of the EPA. So what are Pruitt's credentials to manage a department such as this? And maybe that's not even the place to begin. Why don't you begin where you'd like?
Well, I wanted to begin with what I think probably everybody in this room already knows, but it's difficult to overstate the seriousness of the environmental threats coming from this administration. We have never had a head of EPA, which is Scott Pruitt, so hostile to the mission of the agency, and never had a president so willing to make decisions that are, so unwilling to make decisions that are based on science and law. And I think, and this probably should come at the end, not at the beginning, but I thought I would frame the discussion by saying, I don't have a lot of hope that we are going to be able to influence this administration. But Congress has a role to play. They can refuse to enact whatever it is that the president's executive orders are calling for. These executive orders have no legal effect. They are wishes. They are directions. Congress, we want you to do this. This agency, we want you to pass or revoke this regulation. His signing the executive order does not make it so. He needs others to do it. And it is also the case that his recently released budget has no effect until a budget is passed by Congress. And I think we do have the potential. We in this room, we in New York, we across the country have the potential to influence Congress. And that is really where we need to focus our efforts. So, just to highlight the seriousness of the environmental threats, the president has proposed to slash EPA's budget by 35%, a third of the entire budget. They are going to cut the EPA Science Office by half, by 50%. And the budget director, not of EPA, of the United States, said we are not spending any more money on climate change because we view it as a waste of money. That is a quote. Scott Pruitt was the former Attorney General of Oklahoma. In that capacity, he sued EPA 14 times. He recently said that he does not believe carbon pollution is the main source of climate change. He has already started to identify areas of EPA that are just going to be eliminated. And probably the most concerning is the agency's ability to be on the ground enforcing environmental laws. So I want to put this in the perspective that I also put it in when I said when I went to law school, which will really date me, there were no environmental courses. When Nixon created EPA 46 years ago, acid rain was destroying the Adirondacks, lakes and forests. The acid came from fossil fuel plants in the Midwest, and the rain and snow that was falling in the Adirondacks was so acidic that it killed the fish and plants in hundreds of Adirondack lakes and streams. We're not 46 years ago. So EPA acted to require those plants to reduce air pollution coming out of their stacks beginning in the early 1970s. And between 1970 and 2012, national emissions of these air pollutants dropped an average of 72%. And acid rain was reduced by 70%. And Adirondack lakes and streams that were significantly damaged by acid rain are coming back. But an EPA decimated by this administration and these budget cuts is not going to be able to guarantee clean air and clean water for the American people. And if they don't have the resources and the responsible leadership to protect us by enforcing the environmental laws of our nation, we are going right back to where we were in the 1970s. So, sorry to start with the dismal stuff, but
What is the region that serves this area for the EPA?
EPA Region 3 is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And actually, although we might think of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands as vacation lands, there could not be more pollution in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a disaster. And as we know, their government is going bankrupt. They are not a state, so they don't have, and their citizens don't have the same kind of voice, such as it is that the citizens of New York and New Jersey have.
And who is the head of Region 3 right now? Who is our contact there?
I don't know. Judith Enck was the head of Region 3 for the entire Obama administration. And she has been an amazing leader. And she will continue to be a voice, I am sure. But she, as all EPA administrators, were required to resign the day after the inauguration. And I think they probably have an acting at this point, because we all know how far behind the president is in appointments. And I doubt very seriously he's gotten around to EPA appointments, so.
So that's where we are today.
I don't know whether we're taking,
Well, we're gonna do questions after unless,
It's just relevant to what you just finished with, if you don't mind. When you were saying that about the acid rain and et cetera, I just want to understand, those regulations are on the books, so to speak, right? So if a coal plant in Ohio decides, oh, well, nobody's watching, we can have a sulfur there if you want, but citizens sue them, aren't the rules still on the books? Isn't litigation probably where a lot of this is going?
well, it is very interesting that you bring up the question of citizen suits. Because this has existed under the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act since the 70s. And I'm not sure what the rationale initially for passing that legislation was, but it has enabled citizens to step in and either incentivize the agency that should be suing, mostly the EPA, or to bring the lawsuit themselves. So legislation is now being introduced in Congress that would require a citizen or organization to pay the fees of the government they're suing, agency, state, federal, if they don't win the suit. And that has never been the case, and that they would have to post a bond.
I heard that.
And that virtually eliminates most citizen suits. So people, yes, those protections exist, but there are people in Washington, and I think probably in many conservative-funded think tanks who have been thinking about this for decades and know exactly where those protections exist and are focused on neutralizing them.
so if I could just ask everyone to please write down your questions, just so we can get through the whole agenda, which could actually shape your questions differently. That's okay? Thank you. So,
And by the way, the Clean Power Plan,
Yeah.
which is an Obama initiative,
I know
which
that.
was meant to impose limits on emissions, is something that this administration is going after.
Well, I'm sure they will. But it already went to the courts once, so I'm wondering about, I'm just wondering how much, I think you answered it, how much legal recourse people might have.
Well, that answers the people. If we're talking about the people's lawyer, that would be the Attorney General.
Yeah.
I think we can expect him not to be aggressively defending against lawsuits against the federal government for failing to enforce or clean up or whatever it might be.
so what does President Trump's recently announced budget plans indicate about environmental protection in the country?
Well, I mean, proposing to cut the budget of EPA by a third speaks for itself. But I actually have, I know this is probably not that cool, but I have on my phone a list of all the things environmentally related. So, and actually, so certainly EPA, but they're also cutting the Department of Interior's budget. They are the ones responsible for overseeing all of the federal lands and what they're used for, by 12%. They're cutting the Energy Department by 6%, and most of the money being spent in the Energy Department is being redirected to nuclear. NASA, they are going to eliminate the science arm of NASA that has been looking at climate change and the research that has been going on in that context. So the budget, the proposed president's budget calls for the elimination of 3,200 staff positions, over 20% of the department. It would eliminate all funding for the enactment of the Clean Power Plan, the regulations designed to curb greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. It will discontinue funding for climate change research and international climate change programs. Here's something that we have to factor in. It would slightly increase funding on drinking and wastewater infrastructure, including a $4 million increase for the state revolving funds meant to ensure clean water for local communities and prevent Flint-like drinking water crises. There would also be, under a different category, a 29% reduction in State Department programs. And you might ask, well, what does that have to do with the environment? The prime target being the United Nations and climate change initiatives at the United Nations, which would lose all of their U.S. funding. They're going to reduce by 21% the funding to the Department of Agriculture. How is that related? National Forest Service. All of our national forests are supported by and protected by the Department of Agriculture. Justice Department, again, like EPA lawyers, these are the enforcers of the laws that are on the books. And to the extent that they are eliminating particular departments within the Justice Department that are focused on those kinds of enforcement, it will curb, eliminate enforcement of our environmental laws. I don't want to go on and on. So the budget eliminates, I love this one. I'm not sure if I could argue it's climate change, but the budget eliminates the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's grants and programs for coastal and marine management. Why that's being targeted, I don't know. So I will stop because I could go, oh, and Department of Interior. So there are 12% decrease in the Department of Interior. It would actually increase funding for programs that drill for oil and gas on public lands and cut funding for programs such as the National Heritage Areas and National Wildlife Refuge Fund.
Hey, Kate,
Yes.
I think there's something to do with Superfund sites, and since we have a Superfund site in the Hudson.
Yeah, I actually, that is under EPA. So the 1/3 cut in EPA is definitely going to impact cleanups. How the cut gets divided up between different parts of EPA and different regions, I don't know, unfortunately. The one last thing I would mention is under the Energy Department, the budget would cut or eliminate programs to support research of breakthrough clean energy technology, including advanced research projects Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program. And by the way, that is one of the things that I just don't get. How does lowering the fuel efficiency of cars make American jobs? How is there any connection at all? And yet Trump went to Detroit or wherever he went to and said, yay, I'm going to take off this, you don't need to keep making your cars more fuel efficient. So now everything will be fine. And it's like, what? What? How does that have anything to do with jobs? Anyway, I'm going off topic.
No, you're not.
Pull me back.
Pull me back for a second, because, as we're talking about the budget, one of the initiatives that's on page 35 of this document, which might be shifting because we're typing, talks about canceling billions in payments to the UN climate change programs, which you mentioned, and to use the savings of that to fix America's water and environmental infrastructure. So, can we talk a little bit more about that in terms of what Trump potentially means in that way? Just to focus on.
Well, I mean, the first thing is, this is how much, in the grand scheme of the budget, is being spent on climate change. This is how much it would cost to fix the decaying infrastructure in this country. So that is just snake oil stuff. It's also true of cutting National Endowment of the Arts, for the arts. This much to that much. It is really just, it doesn't make any economic sense. And I keep hoping that the fact-checking that many news agencies have been doing will come up with an article that says, his saying I'm going to use this money to fix that problem just doesn't add up. Somebody, I think there was something in the New York Times that said that the Mike Maloney, is that the name of the? Mulvaney. Is just Sean Spicer with a calculator. So
what's happening then, the current budget, current New York State budget, where the governor's budget is looking to apply $2 billion towards clean water infrastructure projects, and the Senate wanting to go further with a $5 billion bond act, which I'm not sure if that's the Republicans. The Republicans want to apply that. So
no, are we talking about New York?
yes, we're bringing it to New York for a second.
New York is on its own trajectory, and it's getting its money not from the federal government,
So
to
there's
a
no
large
connection.
extent.
There's no connection to.
No, I mean, it is certainly true that New York State budget depends in some ways on federal money. Whether there is federal money, and I think there is, that came through EPA to deal with the infrastructure problem in New York, I don't know the extent that that is true. But the Bond Act is a state bond act, and it is raising money from state taxpayers to do work in this state. And that is not going to be in any way determined by Congress, except to the point that they, if they yank federal funds out of other parts of the New York budget, then maybe that could have an impact, but they can't directly impact that. Okay, there is a 44% cut in brownfields programs, to your point, Kevin, and a 31% cut in state grants for brownfields. 69% cut in climate protection. 30% cut in drinking water grants to states.
I think everyone knows what brownfields are.
Yeah, brownfields is a New York State term that is a mechanism for addressing contaminated sites by incentivizing redevelopment of them. So it gives a significant break to the redeveloper, and the site is redeveloped, is cleaned up only to the point necessary for the proposed redevelopment. So it doesn't have to be immaculate, it doesn't have to be, cleaned up to be the site of a school or a hospital, if it's going to be an industrial facility. And those were named brownfields, because they weren't gonna be green, I guess.
What about Superfund sites?
Superfund is just a listing of the most highly contaminated sites that are targeted for federal funding.
Which
for
is what
cleanup.
happened in Newburgh to the water. I think that was determined.
Yes, and what it does is it
Leases and
It
rentals.
opens the site to federal, direction and support for the cleanup.
So, I wouldn't mind getting back to talking a little bit about what you mentioned about Congress and that being something that the citizens can actually work on. We talked a little bit about that we know that Congress currently is taking actions to reverse Obama's environmental initiatives at the moment, at the direction of the executive action. So can we speak a little bit about the Congressional Review Act that you had mentioned earlier, just to kind of give us a sense?
Yeah, so how many people know what the Congressional Review Act is? It is an incredibly powerful tool that is available to Congress right now. It was enacted, and I'm a little foggy on this, but I think it was the late 1990s, and then never used. I think it had been used once or twice. Now, Congress has discovered they have this incredibly powerful tool for reversing what the Obama administration did through regulation in the last part of the administration. And it is the time frame is determined by legislative days. And because there are many times during which Congress is not in session and not working, that legislative day time frame takes Congress back to June of 2016. And they can act with a majority vote, has to be both houses of Congress, to basically revoke a regulatory action that had been taken by the Obama administration. Doesn't require additional rulemaking or anything else. And even worse, it prohibits the agency from promulgating anything like that disapproved or revoked regulation ever again. So for instance, one of the things that is, the House of Representatives has already passed the resolution of disapproval of the methane rule, and I'll explain what that is, and they're waiting for a Senate vote on it. The methane rule basically directed the Bureau of Land Management to, or it was actually a BLM regulation that required oil and gas operators on public lands to control the amount of methane that they are just wasting, flaring or releasing into the environment, because they don't have and they can't be bothered or it's too expensive to put in place the mechanism that would allow them to capture that methane. Now, methane is a product that can be sold, and so that's our methane. They should be capturing and selling that methane and then giving the taxpayers of this country a royalty, but they're not. And probably more concerning for us is, it is a greenhouse gas that is, what's the multiplier? 30 times?
37 times.
Yeah, more powerful than carbon. And they're just releasing it, and so this was a regulation that was, after 2 years of public input and industry input and blah, 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 was finalized and issued in that time frame that allows Congress to go back with the Congressional Review Act and just throw it out the window. And BLM would not be able to go back and do another regulation that would be able to control methane.
What is BLM regulation exactly?
Well, no, every agency of the federal government can issue regulations. BLM is the Bureau of Land Management, which is a division within the Department of Interior, whose responsibility it is to regulate activities on leased federal lands. So this is just the horribleness of our wrapping our minds around it, beginning to accept the reality. We talk about Congress CRAing. It's already become a verb. And they have done that with a rule that prohibited the dumping of coal ash waste in streams. They've already thrown that one out. They've already CRA'd that one. And it is also something that they're going to be using to go after other rules that have equally important environmental significance. And this is Congress acting. But, you know, they're taking their direction from the executive orders that the president is issuing. He's sort of saying, go do that. Or no, he's saying, I proclaim it, but of course his proclaiming it doesn't make it so. And then Congress
What is the
takes the
obligation?
action
Yeah.
that makes it so.
So what is the obligation of Congress to do that? I mean, if it were a Democratic, you know, heavy.
Oh, no,
Congress-
they could
They
ignore
don't
him.
have-
They could ignore him.
Right,
They wouldn't have to do it.
right.
The president isn't king. At least most presidents don't think.
Well, so what can we do, what can be done? Not what can we do yet, what can be done on in the national landscape with all of these things in terms of, you know, I guess New York State and California.
Well,
Or-
I think well, I do want to sort of go to what can be done. And I know this may seem a little, there's two different things, obviously. And one is one that I'm experiencing as a resident of Colorado. The other is one that you're experiencing in New York. So I guess I should start in New York. In New York, we have a governor, and we have a population, and we have an ethic that is very, very focused on maintaining environmental controls and protections, generally speaking, in the face of what Washington is doing. And between New York and California and a handful of other states, they are going to be critical to maintain those protections, not only for their state's residents, but as a model that at the point in time, and I'm sure there will be a point in time when this administration is no longer in control, and there will be a need to reconstruct the environmental protections that have been shredded by this administration. The models of New York and California and a handful of other states are going to be really important to have in front of us. And, you know, the fuel efficiency, for instance, that California is going to be driving. You know, those steps will continue to move forward, even though the rest of the country is not. And so you are lucky to live in New York. You also have, I think, an opportunity to encourage your elected representatives and your governor to move farther and faster and stronger. The Attorney General is great. He's still suing ExxonMobil over their misrepresentations to their investors about the fact that climate change was going to strand a whole bunch of their assets, and they were really overstating the value of their company. So it couldn't be more important, your role, in terms of making sure that this state continues to move forward. I know one of your future lectures is about energy.
Local energy production.
Local energy. That's a model that, if that continues to move forward and strengthens, that's a model that is transferable as soon as that transfer becomes possible. I'm in a slightly different situation, as are many people. I have in Colorado a Republican senator and a Democratic senator. And I spend a lot of time calling and emailing and petitioning my senators about these votes. I petitioned my Republican senator on the vote on the methane rule, and he wrote me back a long email. I was really impressed. I never got anything like this from either Senator Schumer or Senator Gillibrand, but explaining why he was likely to vote in favor of throwing out the methane rule. However, I have read several articles that have identified this particular senator as potentially the swing vote on whether or not this methane rule is going to get tossed. And all of a sudden, you know, that gives us, his constituents, an opportunity to potentially influence him. So what's our message? Everybody knows the message. We are watching everything you say, everything you do, every vote you take. And we will remember when your re-election comes up. And they are thinking about this. And I think that the reason why our Republican senator, as opposed to some other states' Republican senator, is paying more attention to that, and there's a lot of public lands in Colorado, needless to say, is because Colorado is a purple state. So it's a lot closer question whether he's going to get the votes for re-election or not. But that is something that we have to keep repeating over and over again across the country. We're watching it, we're paying attention, we're not going to stop, and we will remember.
And that's one of the things too, to even bring it closer to New York and saying, what can we do? We know that one of those things is that we're going to have to stay with it, right? That those who are in power today have been working on this for decades, as you're saying. But if we could just talk a little bit more about New York State constituents and what they can do. We talked about supporting our government. We talked those who are trying to create safeguards and models and what have you. We've talked about seeker. We've talked about being in this for the long game. How can we
Well,
speak
I
to
do want
this?
to speak to two things. One is, I'm going to be a little bit facetious, but not completely. We need an army of lawyers. An army of lawyers. Think about what happened when the first muzzle ban got issued. An army of lawyers showed up in the middle of the night, over the weekend. And if you think about the checks and balances in our, what was once a democracy, not so much now, we don't have Congress, we don't have the executive, they're really trying to neutralize the press. So what do we have left? We have courts. And, you know, obviously the appointment of a judge to the Supreme Court is going to be an issue, but many, many things never get to the Supreme Court. They get decided in lower courts. And the record on which those decisions are made is made by lawyers who are representing the interests that we care about. So if you have any children or nephews or brothers or sisters, encourage them to go to law school. Encourage lawyers to work for advocacy, not-for-profits. I am being a little bit facetious, but I actually think this has become, in this moment of time, one of our most powerful tools.
Well, speaking to the law, seeker, which we've been discussing, is going under some current changes, or they're trying to make some changes.
Well, I mean, that is actually, it has been on a much longer trajectory than what's going on right now. So the business community in New York has been lobbying for changes to seeker for a very, very long time, because it increases their costs of, they say, of any project, because they have to go through the environmental review process, and that takes time, and that. And so I want to say 10 years ago, DEC held a lot of forums in which people could come in and talk about things that they wanted to see or didn't want to see. I went to several of them in Region 3 in New Paltz, and then after that, DEC internally, fought a lot about what changes they thought they might want to make. And then they did an environmental review on those changes as required by seeker. And then there was an opportunity to comment on the environmental review, which Waterkeeper did, I did about 4 years ago. And now they have just released, DEC, in January, I think, their proposed changes to seeker. And I can tell you, they're not as many or as fundamental as what the business community was looking for.
Great.
They are more than what we would like to see. There is a comment period that's open until, who knows?
May 19th.
May 19th? So if people want to weigh in, and one of the areas that we are concerned about, environmental lawyers in New York, is that they have expanded what's called the Type 2 list. And so Type 2 are all the actions that are exempt from environmental review. And usually it's just permit renewal or, administrative stuff. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. It is not coming out of Trump or this administration. It's been a long slog of the industry, business trying to get seeker stripped back, and many people pushing back on that.
So just in closing, because I want to take everyone's questions, just so we can.
Well, I do want to say one.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to ask a
Well,
question?
I do want to ask. a
Because I
question.
have something that I want to say
Let
in
me-
closing.
That's great. So before we do that,
Okay.
how would the citizens go about making comments to seeker? How would you do that? Would you go to your local government and bring it
Well,
up?
no, there's been a notice put in the Environmental Notice Bulletin, which is something that comes out once a week that DEC issues, that says how you can submit comments. It's usually sending it to an email. There might be a mail address. And you could probably go on DEC's website and search for seeker regulation, proposed seeker rulemaking, and it would take you to the place that explains what's going on.
It does.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
think we're gonna
Just put
have to do a workshop
ENB
on
and
that.
seeker.
So I do want to, and this is sort of in closing.
We'll follow up on that. We'll follow up on the
So
seeker.
I brought the two books that I have been trying desperately to get through. They're very dark. Dark Money by Jane Mayer.
Oh, I do?
Jane Mayer.
And then you want-
This Changes Everything.
Yes.
Capitalism versus the Climate by Naomi Klein. And the only reason I bring these up, I think it's really important for us who are trying to push back against what's happening now to understand how we got here. And this didn't happen because Trump came along. This is the ultra-conservative forces in this country playing a very long game. They have been working on this for decades. They went and worked on state legislatures to win them over so that at the time that the last census was done, they could gerrymander the electoral districts in states across the country. This is the kind of long game we're talking about that they have been fighting. And, we are not going to defeat them with a short game. We're going to have to be in it for the long game. We are going to have to support people that are running in local elections. We are going to have to run in local elections. And we are going to have to target trying to win over state legislatures before the next census. Literally, that's the kind of long game we're going to have to play. I also personally would love to see the electoral college done in. I don't know how much of a fantasy that is, but there is a tremendous amount of money on the table here. And I know one of the things that this document is asked in several places is, what's the motivation for doing this, that, or the other thing? And to me, the motivation is very simple. It is all about money and people. And what's at stake is a huge amount of money in fossil fuels that the people that control that money want to continue to make. Why do you want to build a whole bunch of pipelines? Really? To get gas from here to there? No. To chain us to 50 years of fossil fuel infrastructure that once built, you can't walk away from, you have to keep using it. And so we can never underestimate the financial and political power of the people that are driving what's going on now. You know, everything, every single environmental initiative that's going on with this administration is about keeping oil and gas and the people that control it in power. And so, you know, we have to keep that in mind when that's what we're, and it actually, it's like, I don't even need to tell you this anymore because they kind of all took off their masks. They said, oh, we don't need Citizens United anymore. We'll just make Tillerson the Secretary of State. You know, it's just like, okay, we're just gonna run the government. Hello, here we are. What are you gonna do about it?
So before we close.
Well, but I did want to add,
No quitting. But what I want to just ask about gerrymandering is that you said before the next census. So if I understand it correctly, you know, it's every 10 years that the charter of New York State is looked at. Is that part of how they determine districts? Do you know?
no, it's not about the charter.
20 that we get to vote on whether or not we want a constitution.
20 years.
Yeah, no, the charter is not. The election,
The state.
the redrawing of election districts is done by the state legislature.
When?
And it's every 10 years,
Every
right?
10 years.
And right after the census, so it's based on the results of the census.
So that
The
just
last
happened.
time
just
it happened, the governor sold us down the river.
Which
To
was,
the Republicans in the Senate.
which was a year, 2
Yeah.
years ago. When was the
Alex, come on.
Well, the census is every 10 years, and then in the ensuing 2 years,
Yes, it
The
takes a
Senate-
while.
the
Yeah.
Senate of the state of New York draws up districts, and in some cases, they're so grossly unfair that suits are successfully brought for the federal courts to deny those gerrymandered districts. This has happened in various places, but the idea of getting ready for activism, particularly with regard to taking back control of the state Senate, is a relatively easy thing to do because it hangs in the balance right now, so to speak.
So, I mean, so that triggers two things in my mind, because you had been pressing me on what are other things that people in New York can do. And I think that it's very confusing, but gas pipelines, their review and approval are done at the federal level by FERC. Oil pipelines are done at the state level.
Right.
And that is an area in which New York citizens have potentially a tremendous amount of power. And the fight against Pilgrim pipelines has been an opportunity to engage local communities and local governments in exercising that power. And Iris can speak more to that as a member of the Coalition Against Pilgrim
And
Pipelines.
Sue's here.
But we have, and Sue too, I can see you, I'm sorry. And, you know, we have gone up and down the Hudson Valley, and the "we" is a very broad "we," meeting, going to every single town and village and city board and explaining to them the power that they have. And this power is because of a New York law, statute on the books already that dates back to the 1920s that says, yeah, oil pipeline companies can build their pipelines, and yeah, there's a path for them to get to the power to exercise eminent domain, taking people's property. However, in order, as a check on that power, which is a broad one, we're going to have all these requirements that these pipeline operators are going to have to meet. And one of them is that cities and villages, they have to go, the pipeline project proponents, to every single city and village in which they want to build a part of their pipeline and get approval by a super majority of the elected body. Super majority. And so we went up and down and we got all of those cities and villages. How many of them are there? 11? Yeah, I think we got 10 of them, including the 4 cities. Newburgh, Kingston, Albany, and Rensselaer, to pass a resolution by a majority vote saying, no way, are we ever going to approve your pipeline? The second thing which you could be involved with is that there is now a bill that's been introduced in the Assembly, and I'm not sure whether they have a Senate co-sponsor or not.
Amador is the Senate.
Yeah, and so this bill just modifies this 1920s law to extend that authority to towns. Because for some reason they gave it to cities and villages, but not to towns. And if that simple change was made, that pipeline would never be able to be built, ever. And so I encourage you to go to your state legislative representatives and urge them to support the passage of the Scartados legislation. And I think you do have information.
So on page
on that.
32, we actually have a copy of Scardado's corp transportation law.
Yeah, it's the New York State Transportation Corporation law.
It's all there. You just go to 32 for a second.
244.
Yeah, it's right here. You can just, could you?
Yeah, I will.
And the
It's
Senate
all
bill
there.
is 5139 and it's Amador.
Okay, it's Amador,
So is
right?
Amador-
So it's really important.
Is that confirmed that Amador is
It's
sponsored?
on his site,
It
it
is.
says sponsor, and I talked to his people about it.
Yeah.
Amador's the.
Is sponsoring it in the Senate.
Yep.
Last session, it went to a vote in the Assembly and passed by a broad bipartisan margin. The Senate leadership never let it go to a vote in the Senate. The pressure has to be on to allow this legislation to go to a vote before the close of the legislative session, which is in June. Everybody knows that we have a state legislature that only works half the year. So, and this doesn't have to be characterized as anti-pipeline legislation. This is pro-local control. Let the local government decide, representing the people in that town or city or village, whether or not they think a pipeline is a good idea. Right now, all the people that live in towns do not have that ability to make that choice. So, very important. And then, sort of my closing thing that I wanted to say, because this has all been pretty depressing, is I do think that as painful as this all is, what is going on right now in terms of the environment under this administration is a wake-up call that we all needed. And the wake-up call is that incremental steps in one direction or another are not enough to save us, the human race on this planet. Because we always talk about saving the planet, but guess what? The planet's still going to be here, we're not. Yeah. And this is just me personally, I know that there are many others that agree with me. I think that the elevation, the highlighting of the relationship between First Nation communities and the earth, water, air, the nature of that relationship and the highlighting of its importance is really critical, because earth and plants and animals and air and water are not just resources put here for human beings to use and abuse and use up and pollute. And this is something that is fundamental to the connection, the relationship that First Nations have with their earth. And I think that, they are teaching us how we need to respect and protect and preserve all of these wonderful air, water, plants, animals, if we are to survive. And so I urge you, all of you, to become water protectors and creature protectors and forest protectors and every kind of protector we could possibly be.
So now we have a question and answer period. So you can actually ask your own questions. That's the idea. No, I mean to hold on to them as they're occurring to you, so that we could get to them when we're finished. Yeah, not for me to read them for you. Could you pass that back? So let's start over here, please. Could you stand up and go on?
My name is Karen Friedman, and I'm on the Environmental Task Force at City New Falls. And thank you for speaking today. You probably know some of the people who had state concern waivers, Jeff Ross, Michael Ross, to talk to the community. And so, I'm on that team for about 10 years. So I'm so glad you said this is not just Trump. This has been going on for several months. And there's other things that I just wanted to point out. You said so many wonderful things, and thank you. We're helping to get the college, helping to try to convince the college to invest from Boston and make investments. That's another really big thing we can do as citizens to encourage these organizations that are so invested, big time. Also, we also had the Humane Society talk about factory farming being one of the most relevant initiators of the problem of climate change on the planet. Not to mention the cruelty to the animals, but factory farming is huge. So just making a decision to not eat is huge. There's one thing that's really always on my mind. I spoke to Josh Fox about this, and this bit to Michael more about it. The UN thing. There's a website, it's www.geoengineeringwatch.org. And www.geoengineeringwatch.org. And this guy named Dane Wiggington, I don't know if you know him, you know West Coast. He's doing all the science around wood chemtrails and around water technology. And the UN has addressed it. They said, we are taking measures against global warming, not climate change,